Previously, we discussed sources of data. We talked about experiments, where the researcher applies some treatment and measures the effects of that treatment on the subjects, and observational studies, where the researcher observes and measures characteristics of the subjects without applying any treatments. Well, now we want to talk about some different types of observational studies. First, the cross-sectional study. With the cross-sectional study, data are observed and measured and collected at one point in time. So data are observed, measured, and collected at one point in time. So, for an example, perhaps you're interested in determining the utilization of a parking lot at a place of business. So, over a month of time, on Mondays through Wednesdays from 8 to 5, say those are the hours of the business, you randomly select 100 times when you'll go out to the parking lot and count the number of empty spaces and record that. So over that month, you're collecting data in this one point in time. You're going to come back with some information about utilization of the parking lot over that 1 month point in time, that month. So that would be considered a cross-sectional study. Okay, the second type is called a retrospective study. Now that word retro might sound a little familiar, and it should help you remember this one, because when we think of retro, we're thinking of something from the past, and that's exactly what this is, data collected from the past. So this would usually occur through old records that you would go through looking for a particular set of data. I'll make a note here that the outcome of interest has already occurred. So it might have already occurred, but no one's done any research on it or done any kind of data analysis of it. So just because it's occurred doesn't mean we have information about it. It's just in data form. So the researcher would go to old records and whatever that might be and study a particular topic. So an example here might be if you're interested in whether or not physical therapy improves return to work outcomes among workers disabled with low back pain. So the researcher might use data from the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, where they've recorded, these people had low back injury claims, and then that you could look to see back in those records, so which people then went and had physical therapy, which ones did not, and you would also be able to get data on whether or not and when these people returned to work. Some may never have come back to work. Some came back at different stages of time. So that's how you would look back over these records. This has already happened. These people were injured, they already had their physical therapy, and they've already either come back to work or not, but now you're going in there as the researcher to get some statistics relative to that, so you can draw some conclusions about how, if any effect, physical therapy had on their return to work outcome. So that's retrospective data collected from the past. Our third type then, not surprisingly, is prospective, which is where we collect data in the future from groups that share common factors. So data collected in the future from groups sharing common factors. So here we pose a question and then we follow it to see what happens. It hasn't already happened, and it's not something we can just look at it this one day today or this month, just what is this? We're going to follow this into the future. So let's consider that same question about whether or not physical therapy improves return to work outcomes among workers who are disabled with low back pain. And this time, instead of this has already happened, so what we have here now are people who have been identified as just a recent low back injury claim. So we have this group where it's a recent claim, and now we're going to follow into the future and follow their different paths of treatment. Some may do physical therapy, some may not, and follow to see what happens down the road, who comes back to work, when do they come back to work, what their restrictions are at work, all that kind of thing. So going into the future with that data. Okay, so these are the 3 types of observational studies that we can use to collect data and study an item of interest.